It all began on a bitterly cold night, with snow swirling in the air. Out of nowhere, my cell phone rang. When I picked it up, I was met with the furious voice of my mother-in-law. "It's because of you that my daughter is in this state. Her face is unrecognizable. It's atrocious. You need to take responsibility. Why did you abandon her? You're despicable." "My name is Amy, and I'm 33 years old. I live with my husband, Zach. Zach has his parents and an older sister. That single phone call from my mother-in-law that night turned my life upside down. Give me back my lively girl. Why did you do something so horrible? I swear I'll make you pay for this. I'll never forgive you." My mother-in-law, possibly out of shock, was making no sense. All she did was spew venom at me. "Mother-in-law, please calm down. I have no idea what you're talking about." Despite my confusion, I tried my best to console her, desperately trying to listen to what she had to say, but all my efforts were futile. "You have no right to be calm at a time like this. It's all your fault, and yet you have the audacity to say such things. Why didn't you help her? Why did you abandon her?" My mother-in-law was just yelling loudly while crying, and there was no conversation at all. Even when I told her to speak slowly, it was like my voice was not reaching her ears, and her vitriol continued endlessly. My father-in-law, who seemed to be behind my mother-in-law, took over the phone. "Amy, I hope you understand what you've done. Do you understand the state our daughter is in now? Fortunately, her life is not in danger, but she has severe injuries. Why did you let her suffer like this?" Since my father-in-law was a little calmer, I honestly told him, "Father, I'm sorry. I really don't understand what you two are talking about. What on earth happened?" He looked perplexed that I knew nothing, but somehow, I got him to tell me the story. It was content that made me doubt my ears. My sister-in-law, a single mother, was living with her young child, about a 20-minute walk from my home. She had a young boyfriend who she had been dating for some time, and he frequently visited. I had heard from Zach they had a quick temper, and had often raised his hand to my sister-in-law. Apparently, his mood was bad last night, and my sister-in-law suffered from more violence than usual. She felt danger to their lives, so she picked up her child in a frenzy and ran out of the house into the falling snow. Without anywhere to go, my sister-in-law thought of her brother, who lived nearby, and went desperately, hoping to find refuge at our house. My sister-in-law rang the doorbell. Zach, who was home at the time, answered. My sister-in-law stood outside the door, holding her child in her only clothes, her face bruised and gasping for breath. Anyone would have known at first glance that something was wrong, but Zach did not show concern for his own sister. Instead, he seemed a bit irritated and said, "If I let people in without permission, Amy will get mad. Sorry, but can you go home? She's scary when she's angry. You understand, right? Please leave," and turned her away from the door. My sister-in-law couldn't believe what her own brother had said, but she was in immediate danger and needed to find refuge. Desperate, she begged him in tears, "At least lend me money for a hotel." She had left in such a hurry that she didn't have her cell phone or wallet. But Zach's response was even more astonishing. "There's no way I have that kind of money. There's money in the house, but Amy would never let me use it without permission. If I did, she'd divorce me. Sorry, but could you try somewhere else? It's cold, so I'm going in. See you." And he closed the door, leaving my sister-in-law in utter despair, fearing for her and her child's lives. She trudged back through the snow and reluctantly returned home, only to face even worse violence from her enraged boyfriend. My sister-in-law was beaten until her face was unrecognizable, and the child was kicked until they lost consciousness. She tried to stop him by clinging to her boyfriend, but the violence only escalated, and her screams echoed through the neighborhood along with the sound of breaking dishes and destruction. A passerby who heard the commotion realized something was wrong and reported it to the police. After that, my sister-in-law and her child, both beaten and collapsed, were found and immediately taken to the hospital by ambulance. Though they are now conscious, they are seriously injured and have been hospitalized with a prognosis of 1 month for full recovery. I got home late last night because of work, and my sister-in-law did not come after I got home. If I had been there, I would have never turned her away. If I had seen my sister-in-law in that state, I would have immediately recognized the danger, let her in, and called the police. I don't understand why my in-laws believe that I was the one who turned her away. On top of the shock of what happened to my sister-in-law, I was overwhelmed by the accusations from my in-laws and was very confused. Despite my father-in-law's relentless accusations, I knew I had to clear up the misunderstanding. Frantically, I explained, "I wasn't home when my sister-in-law came by. I worked late last night at the cafe I run. Had I been home, I would have noticed her distress and let her in. I would never turn her away. Please give me some time to figure out what happened." Although he wasn't convinced, He seemed to cool down and hung up the phone. That day, I was working late at my cafe, developing a new menu. I had informed Zach about the expected time I'd be home, but I ended up working longer. I missed the last subway and had to take a taxi, arriving home past midnight. When I got home, I saw Zach, but he didn't mention anything about his sister. I was confused about why he had done what he had. When I confronted him after he came home from work that night, his response was shocking. I could tell something was wrong when she showed up, but I was just about to enjoy my beer, and it was cold outside, so I wanted to close the door quickly. Plus, I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I couldn't hide my anger at his selfish excuse. Didn't you feel anything seeing her like that? Why couldn't you at least let her in? She's been through so much since you turned her away. When I detailed his sister's current condition, he justified himself by saying, "Remember how you used to complain when my parents dropped in without notice? I thought I was being considerate by not letting her in, thinking you wouldn't like it. What did I do wrong?" It turns out he had assumed that I would be bothered if his sister showed up unannounced and had turned her away. I asked him another question. "Why didn't you lend her any money? You could have done that much, couldn't you?" He responded, "I was taken aback when she asked for money. I'm short on cash right before payday. I just lost money playing slots recently, and I hardly had $10 in my wallet. If I gave her our household money, I knew you would get mad, so I refused." I don't see anything wrong with what I said. I was speechless, completely shocked. I had always thought he was a bit self-centered, but he also had many good qualities. I had been giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I realized it was a terrible mistake. He was incapable of making sound decisions because he always put himself first. He had no compassion for others, not even a bit of kindness, and he was foolish enough to prioritize his drinking over his own sister's distress. But it was too late to realize this now. He didn't seem to feel guilty or responsible at all about his sister being rushed to the hospital. From my perspective, she would have ended up like this anyway, no matter where she ran off to. On the bright side, she's safe in the hospital now. We're both safe, all thanks to me, right? He was talking about it as if it was someone else's business. His heartless remarks were making me feel like I was losing my sanity, so I decided not to talk to him any longer, holding back my anger. I reported Zach's irresponsible behavior towards his sister to my father-in-law the previous night. Upon hearing my words, Zach's father lost his composure. In a fit of rage, he exclaimed, "There's no way my Zach would do such a thing to his own sister. You're lying. Stop making up stories. Amy, are you trying to make Zach the worst just to escape your own guilt? If you're going to spew such nonsense, then show me some proof." He refused to listen to me at all and again blamed me for everything. I endured his accusations, while desperately trying to figure out how to prove my innocence. If things remained this way, I would be branded a monster, while Zach, the real culprit who drove his sister away, will live on without any sense of guilt or retribution. This was a situation I could not tolerate. I remembered that my sister-in-law had arrived at our home around 9 p.m. that night. After much thought, I found something that could prove my innocence. My shop was equipped with a security camera. The footage clearly showed me working alone until around 11 p.m. that night. Armed with this footage and another piece of evidence, a taxi receipt that showed the time I got home, I went to my in-laws and proved that I wasn't at home at the time. I was at my shop when your daughter came by. Do you believe me now? It was probably something they didn't want to believe, but faced with clear evidence, they had no choice but to accept it. Zach's father, his hand trembling, muttered, "So, Amy wasn't home then?" Despite their shock, Zach's parents hastily called him in to uncover the truth about that night. The moment he arrived, they fiercely demanded, "Why did you drive your sister away?" Just as he had done with me, Zach tried to deflect all blame onto me, claiming that he thought I would dislike having his sister in our home. Hearing this, his father said, "We already know that Amy wasn't home at that time, but your sister says she saw a woman in the house. How do you explain that?" Zach was speechless. If there was another woman in our home at 9 p.m., there was only one possible explanation. "Wait, Zach, what is going on? Who is this woman?" I asked him, my voice shaking. Zach's face turned pale as he squirmed under the questioning from both his parents and me, until I finally confessed everything. When I told Zach I would be late because I was working on a new menu, he saw it as an opportunity to bring his mistress home. He knew I often came home after midnight when I was immersed in my work, so he felt safe inviting her over. When his sister suddenly showed up asking to be let in, he panicked and drove her away for fear of his affair being discovered. "You fool, Not only did you betray Amy, but you also left your only sister out in the snow. What were you thinking? Why didn't you lend her any money? Explain yourself." His father's anger was overwhelming, and Zach confessed the real reason he hadn't given her any money. He actually had plenty of spending money left, but he didn't want to lend it because he wanted to buy a bag and shoes for his mistress. He didn't want to upset his mistress for the sake of his sister, so he wanted to get rid of her quickly, which led to shutting the door on her. Zach admitted everything, but his parents were even more furious than I was. Before being a brother or a husband, you lack basic human decency. It's our responsibility as parents that you grew up to be this kind of person, but we cannot tolerate this and maintain our relationship. From today, we're cutting ties with you. Don't ever show your face to us again." Zach's father disowned him. In a similar vein, I added, "I'm divorcing you. You cheated on me and put your sister's life at risk by leaving her out in the snow. I can't live with someone like you anymore." Zach was shocked at being disowned and confronted with a divorce all at once and started begging for forgiveness, crying, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Please forgive me." He clung to his father's leg, but his father simply shook him off. "What you did is the absolute worst thing in our eyes." His parents and I never forgave Zach. It turned out he had been having an affair with a co-worker for over a year, bringing her to our house while I was away. The betrayal was infuriating, especially since Zach tried to blame his mistreatment of my sister-in-law on me, which only fueled my anger and cemented my decision to divorce him. I had Zach sign the divorce papers and promptly submitted them. Immediately afterward, I went to a law firm, hired a lawyer, and filed for substantial damages against both Zach and his mistress. I also reached out to Zach's boss, who had been our matchmaker at our wedding, and tearfully informed him about the divorce, detailing Zach's affair and his mistress' involvement. Zach's boss, a man who held human decency in high regard, was outraged, as he had previously advised Zach never to betray his wife. He was particularly furious upon learning about the infidelity. The news reached upper management, and following his boss's recommendation, Zach was transferred to a branch office in the countryside, while his mistress was reassigned to a different department where she spent her days sorting documents. However, my sister-in-law's response was even more ruthless. Still reeling from her injuries, she was deeply angered by Zach's actions. Using her connections from working at one of Zach's company's clients, she exposed and spread the details of the cruelty she and her child had suffered. The employees, who had initially thought the divorce was simply due to an affair, were shocked by the truth. Zach's abandonment of his sister to cover up his affair became a scandal within the company. The rumor spread quickly, and Zach became widely suspected of being a terrible human being. Ostracized by his colleagues, his work performance suffered, leading to his demotion. Unable to endure the isolation, he'd eventually quit. To pay the substantial alimony, he depleted his savings and now works live-in part-time jobs. Most of his salary goes toward alimony, and I've heard he struggles to afford winter clothing, often shivering in thin t-shirts. The mistress stubbornly held onto her job, despite the judgmental stares from her colleagues. In light of the damages I sought, I decided to pursue the payment from her parents after consulting with my lawyer. When I learned about the situation, they were shocked and immediately required their daughter to pay the full amount after verifying the facts. The mistress began bombarding me with abusive voicemail messages, accusing me of ruining her life and forcing her into debt. I found the messages unbearable and forwarded them to her parents. They responded with an apology letter, assuring me they would ensure their daughter would not trouble me again. The harassing calls ceased after that. As for my sister-in-law, her abusive boyfriend's actions became a police matter, allowing her to file for damages for her injuries. It was a difficult process, but she eventually managed to break free from him. My in-laws and sister-in-law apologized for initially blaming me and for Zach's infidelity. While both the betrayal and their initial accusations were painful, I understood their emotional turmoil upon seeing their daughter taken away in an ambulance after such severe abuse. Zach's affair wasn't their fault, and I didn't hold a grudge against them. On the contrary, I hoped they would heal from the trauma and support my sister-in-law and her child through the recovery. If I were in their position, my parents would likely have reacted similarly. My in-laws and sister-in-law are fundamentally good people, and even though I'll probably never see them again now that I've divorced Zach, I genuinely wish them well and hope they take care of themselves. I moved closer to the cafe I run, making it within walking distance. This change means I no longer need to worry about catching the last train and can focus more on developing new menu ideas. Though I was caught up in unexpected events, I believe I would have been unhappy if I had stayed married. Some actions are simply unacceptable. and I'm committed to living a life I can be proud of, always keeping that in mind.